Is it time to repeal the Second Amendment? Seriously. Professor Allan Lichtman tells us all about it. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. United. On the line with us is Professor Allan Lichtman. He's the Distinguished Professor at the Department of History at American University. He wrote previously The Case for Impeachment. His new book, Repeal the Second Amendment. His Twitter handle, by the way, is Allan Lichtman, Lichtman. Professor Lichtman, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Good to talk to you again.
So give me your argument for repealing the Second Amendment in a nutshell.
Yeah. For over 200 years, the Second Amendment was essentially a dead letter. It was only interpreted by the courts and policymakers as protecting common defense through a well-regulated militia. This was admitted by the NRA itself in an internal 1955 memo. Then, after the so-called revolt in Cincinnati, when the new militant leadership came up, the NRA hijacked the Second Amendment and distorted it to claim an unlimited right to keep and bear private arms. The gun control movement fell right into the trap. Instead of challenging this, they said, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support gun control. It's an uninspiring and failed argument. Not for a quarter of a century has the federal government passed a new gun control measure, despite constant mass shootings, despite some 40,000 deaths in recent years from gunfire. And in fact, they let the assault weapon ban lapse in 2004. A new approach is needed to really inspire the gun control movement and get it moving again. We've got to take on the Second Amendment, inspire a grassroots movement for repeal. And repeal has happened before with counterproductive amendments. The Prohibition Amendment was repealed just 14 years later. And even if repeal is not achieved, this movement would reinvigorate the entire gun control effort.
I mean, since the ratification of the Constitution in 1789, there have been over, I believe, over 30,000, I'm certain over 29,000 efforts to amend the Constitution that have actually been introduced into Congress. Only 27 amendments have made their way through, or arguably 28, including the one that got repealed. And the first 10 of those, of course, were, 1791 kind of pro forma. They were agreed to, at the time of the ratification of the Constitution. So if we've only got 17 amendments or 18, and the only thing that we've repealed was prohibition, which I mean, America had turned into a war zone in the 13 or 14 years that prohibition was in place. What makes you think that this is even a viable argument?
2 points. One, yes, the repeal of prohibition was the only explicit repeal of an amendment, but other amendments have quite significantly repealed elements of the Constitution. We know that we repealed the selection of senators by state legislatures and replaced it with popular vote. We repealed the original way you select vice presidents, which was the second highest vote getter in the Electoral College. We replaced that with the ticket system. We authorized voting for women, for 18-year-olds. So indeed, the Constitution has been much more mutable than we believe. Plus, as Justice Brandeis says, lots of things happen that we once thought were impossible, and those are the worthwhile things. Who would have thought 30 years ago that it was even remotely conceivable that a conservative United States Supreme Court would establish the legality of gay marriage? We create political reality. We just don't succumb to it. And as I said, even if we don't succeed, we need a radical new direction for the utterly failed gun control movement of the past 25 years. It's time to stop playing not to lose and start playing to win.
Yeah, amen. The book is Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America by Professor Allan J. Lichtman, who is our guest right now. How do you have any advocates for this? Are there any senators who have already explicitly come out for a repeal of the Second Amendment? I don't know of any myself.
Yeah, I don't think there have been any senators. I think there have been some House members, but the most distinguished advocacy for repeal of the Second Amendment comes from a most renowned source, and that is the late Justice John Paul Stevens, who in 2018 wrote the op-ed explicitly advocating for the repeal of the Second Amendment.
I remember that.
Only way to redeem the legacy of those tens of thousands of Americans who were killed by gunfire each year. And I think he wrote it in the wake of some of the mass shootings that have marred our nation. You know, The Onion, the satirical magazine, said, you know, the gun lobby claims that we can do nothing about these proliferation of mass shootings, even though we're the only nation that suffers from them.
Yeah. It's truly remarkable how I thought one of the most compelling parts of your book, or at least early on in your book, I read it on the air today as one of our book reports, was your comparison between the United States and Australia after the Tasmanian Massacre in 1996, how Australia, you know, put into place very strong gun control laws, which still didn't prevent people from having guns for sport shooting, for hunting, or for self-defense, but nonetheless very, very strict gun control laws, and the per capita rates of homicide and suicide by gun in Australia radically decrease. I mean, people say, well, there's not as many people in Australia as there are in the United States, so of course your raw numbers are going to be different, but the per person numbers have changed.
Exactly. You know, the NRA, as I point out in the repeal of the Second Amendment, the case for a safer America, said, oh my God, Australia's adopting all of these gun control laws, and I quote, there will be blood. But in fact, in the period since the NRA wrote that editorial, homicides in Australia by gunfire have slightly declined, while ours have soared by thousands. You know, look at if the NRA were right, we should be the safest of our peer nations. We are the least safe. Taking the G7 nations plus Australia, per capita, per person, an American is, get this, more than 20 times more likely to be murdered by gunfire than in these other peer democracies.
Yeah, it's amazing.